The body camera timestamp read 3:47 p.m. when Officer Raymond Brooks approached the black Mercedes sedan parked 3 houses from its registered address. No traffic violation. No suspicious activity. Just a black woman in professional attire, sitting in her own neighborhood on a Tuesday afternoon. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," Brooks announced, his hand already resting on his service weapon. "This is a routine investigation." Judge Mildred Richards didn't move. Her hands remained visible on the steering wheel, her voice steady and precise. "Officer, on what legal basis are you detaining me? I've committed no violation, and I live on this street." Brooks leaned closer to her window, and 4 cameras captured what happened next. If you're shocked by what you've just heard, wait until you see what those cameras revealed. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Stories like this expose the truth that powerful people don't want you to see. Now, let's talk about who Judge Richards really was. The woman behind the wheel of that Mercedes had a resume that would make most attorneys weep with envy. Mildred Richards graduated summa cum laude from Howard University School of Law at 24, already marked as one of the most brilliant legal minds of her generation. She didn't chase corporate money or prestigious firm partnerships. Instead, she walked straight into the offices of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where she spent 8 years dismantling Jim Crow's modern descendants one case at a time. Her record spoke for itself. 17 landmark civil rights victories, including 3 cases that made it to the Supreme Court. She specialized in police misconduct litigation, the kind of work that made her both revered in civil rights circles and despised in police union halls. At 32, she received a call that changed everything. The president had nominated her for a federal judgeship, making her one of the youngest federal appointees in American history. 15 years on the bench had only sharpened her reputation. Judge Richards ran her courtroom with precision and zero tolerance for constitutional violations. Attorneys who appeared before her knew to have their citations correct and their arguments airtight. She had no patience for sloppy police work, fabricated evidence, or convenient memory lapses from officers on the stand. Her written opinions were studied in law schools for their clarity and moral force. Now, at 47, she sat on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the most powerful judicial positions in the Southeast. Her current caseload included sealed matters involving public corruption, and this particular Tuesday, she'd been reviewing documents for a case that would expose systematic misconduct in law enforcement across 3 counties. The leather document case on her passenger seat contained grand jury materials, FBI investigative summaries, and statistical analyses of discriminatory policing patterns in Metro Atlanta. The irony was almost poetic. She was presiding over a police misconduct case in a neighboring county while sitting in her own car, about to become a victim of the very abuse she spent her career fighting. Judge Richards reached slowly for her purse, narrating every movement. "Officer, I'm retrieving my credentials now. My hands are in plain view." She produced her driver's license first, then her state bar card, then her federal judicial identification, a card that typically ended any law enforcement encounter immediately. Brooks barely glanced at them. "Ma'am, I don't care if you're the Queen of England," he said, his voice carrying the casual contempt of a man who believed himself untouchable. "You're going to comply with my investigation, or you're going to be arrested for obstruction." 4 body cameras were recording now. Brooks' chest-mounted camera, 2 backup officers who had materialized from nowhere, and the dash cam of Brooks' patrol vehicle. Every word, every gesture, every violation was being captured in high definition. Richards understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a mistake or a case of mistaken identity. This was intentional, targeted harassment, the kind she'd seen in deposition after deposition, case after case. The kind that happened to black professionals in neighborhoods that certain officers believed they didn't belong in. "Officer Brooks," she said, reading his nameplate, her voice still measured despite the rage building in her chest, "I'm asking you directly. What is the legal basis for this detention? What violation have I committed?" Brooks keyed his radio, and Richards heard him use a code she didn't recognize. "Control, I got a 10 to 32 in progress, Cascade Heights area. Subject is non-compliant." Other officers would later testify that 10-32 wasn't in any official code book. It was their private terminology, their signal that they'd found another target for what they called a good stop: black drivers in affluent white neighborhoods. Neighbors were emerging onto their porches now, phones raised, recording. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down, a retired schoolteacher. The Johnsons across the street, both of them professors at Morehouse. They knew Judge Richards. They knew exactly what they were witnessing. And Richards knew that every camera, every witness, every second of documentation would matter when this ended up in court, because it would end up in court. She was already building her case, cataloging every violation, preparing for the legal battle that would follow. Comply now, prosecute later. Stay alive first, seek justice second. Brooks ordered her out of the vehicle with a hand on his weapon, treating a federal judge sitting in her own neighborhood like an armed suspect. Richards complied, moving slowly, deliberately, narrating every action for the cameras. I'm stepping out of the vehicle now. My hands are visible. I'm not reaching for anything. The moment she was clear of the driver's seat, Brooks began his search. No warrant, no probable cause, no legal justification whatsoever. Just the raw exercise of authority he'd wielded without consequence for 14 years. His hands moved through her vehicle with practiced efficiency, checking the glove box, under the seats, opening the center console. Then he saw it. The leather document case on the passenger seat, embossed with the seal of the United States courts. "What's in the case?" he demanded. "Sealed federal court materials," Richards replied, her voice sharp now. "Officer, you do not have authorization to open that case. Those documents are classified grand jury materials protected under federal law. Opening that case without authorization is a federal crime." Brooks smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd heard warnings before and ignored them all. He forced the case open, and his body camera captured everything that followed. His hands rifling through documents marked, sealed by order of the court, in bold red letters. Pages stamped federal grand jury material. Unauthorized disclosure is a federal offense. He photographed them with his phone, each click of the camera shutter another federal violation, another count that would eventually be charged. What Officer Raymond Brooks didn't know, what he couldn't know as he photographed those pages, was that he was staring at his own investigative file. The FBI corruption probe that Judge Richards was reviewing included a comprehensive analysis of discriminatory policing patterns in Metro Atlanta. Exhibit 47C was a database analysis of traffic stops in affluent neighborhoods, with officers' names color-coded by violation frequency. Raymond Brooks' name appeared in dark red, flagged for immediate investigation. The statistical analysis showed his stop patterns were so discriminatory they exceeded the mathematical threshold for random chance by a factor of several trillion to one. He was photographing the evidence of his own 12-year crime spree, creating an indelible record of his access to materials that would prove he'd compromised a federal investigation. The fatal error wasn't just illegal, it was cosmically stupid. 43 miles away in the federal courthouse, Terrence Morrison checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Judge Richards was never late for her security check-ins, a mandatory protocol for judges handling sensitive cases. At 4:15 p.m., his phone should have received her standard message, a simple emoji that signaled all clear. By 4:30, he was concerned. By 4:45, he was activating emergency procedures. Morrison had been Richards' judicial assistant for 9 years. He knew her patterns, her punctuality, her unwavering adherence to protocol. He also knew what was in that document case, and he knew the security requirements attached to those materials. He picked up his phone and dialed the U.S. Marshal Service Duty Office. "This is Terrence Morrison, assistant to Judge Mildred Richards, 11th Circuit. Judge Richards has missed her mandatory security check-in. She was last reported leaving the courthouse at 3:20 p.m. with sealed grand jury materials. I'm activating emergency protocol." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, the Marshal Service had activated GPS tracking on Richards' federal-issued phone and tablet. The location data came back at 4:52 p.m. Atlanta Police Department, Zone 3 Station, booking area. A federal judge was in police custody, and nobody had notified the federal authorities. By 5 p.m., U.S. Marshal Angela Reeves was en route with a tactical team and 2 FBI agents from the Public Corruption Unit. DOJ attorneys were already being briefed on a secure conference call. At 5:23 p.m., Captain William Thornton was processing paperwork in his office when his door burst open without a knock. 4 U.S. Marshals in tactical gear, 2 FBI agents with credentials already displayed, and 3 Department of Justice attorneys who looked ready to burn his precinct to the ground. "Where is Judge Mildred Richards?" Marshal Reeves demanded. Thornton felt his stomach drop. "Judge, we've got a Mildred Richards in booking, but she's not." He didn't finish the sentence. He was already reaching for the phone, already knowing his career had just ended, already understanding that his officer had just created a federal incident that would destroy careers, end pensions, and trigger investigations that would reach every corner of his department. The reckoning had arrived. What happened next changed everything, not just for Officer Brooks, but for an entire police department. If you want to see more stories where justice actually prevails, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think should happen to officers like Brooks. Your engagement helps us bring more of these stories to light. Now, let's witness the moment everything fell apart. The booking area of Zone 3 station fell silent when the federal convoy arrived. Marshal Reeves didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her credentials spoke volumes, and the 3 DOJ attorneys behind her carried documents that made Captain Thornton's hands shake as he read them. Federal emergency warrant. Immediate seizure of all recording devices. Preservation order for all physical evidence. And there, in holding cell 3, sat Judge Mildred Richards, still in her blazer, her expression unreadable. "Release her now," Reeves said. It wasn't a request. Within minutes, Richards was escorted out by federal agents, while DOJ attorneys began seizing every piece of evidence related to the stop. Brooks' body camera was removed from his chest before he could process what was happening. His backup officers surrendered their cameras without a word. The patrol car's dashcam system was downloaded on site. Every second of the encounter was now in federal custody. Richards gave her initial statement in a federal vehicle parked outside the precinct, her words precise and devastating. She identified 17 separate constitutional violations for federal crimes and 3 breaches of judicial security protocol. By 6:15 p.m., she was headed home under U.S. Marshal protection. By 6:45 p.m., FBI agents were executing search warrants at 3 locations simultaneously. Brooks' locker at the precinct yielded a notebook containing license plate numbers and addresses, what prosecutors would later call his hunting log. His personal vehicle contained a burner phone with photos of dozens of drivers, almost all of them black, almost all taken during stops. His home computer was a gold mine of evidence. Text message chains with other officers using racial slurs, spreadsheets tracking stops by neighborhood and race, and saved news articles about demographic changes in historically white Atlanta neighborhoods with his handwritten notes in the margins. One note, circled in red ink, would become Prosecution Exhibit 1. Keep the neighborhood clean. By 8:30 p.m., Brooks was in federal custody. By midnight, the U.S. Attorney's Office had impaneled an emergency grand jury. The investigation that Judge Richards had been reviewing was about to expand dramatically, and Officer Raymond Brooks had just become its primary target. The FBI's data analysis unit worked through the night, and what they uncovered was breathtaking in its scope and systemic nature. Brooks' patrol log for the past 12 years showed 1,847 investigatory stops in affluent neighborhoods. Of those stops, 1,736, a staggering 94%, involved black drivers. The demographics of those neighborhoods told a different story. Black residents comprised only 23% of the population in Brooks patrol areas. Senior statistician Dr. Helena Martinez ran the numbers 3 times, checking her methodology, because the results seemed almost impossible. The probability of this pattern occurring by chance was 1 in 847 trillion. To put it in perspective, Dr. Martinez testified, "You are more likely to win the Powerball jackpot 5 times in a row than to randomly generate Brooks' stop pattern without racial discrimination." The numbers didn't just suggest bias. They proved it with mathematical certainty that exceeded the standards for any scientific inquiry. As investigators dug deeper, victims began to emerge from the shadows. They identified 217 individuals who had been stopped, searched, detained, or arrested by Brooks over 12 years. The victim profile was remarkably consistent. Black professionals in their 30s to 50s, driving newer vehicles, stopped in neighborhoods like Cascade Heights, Collier Hills, and Brookhaven, all areas experiencing racial demographic transition as black families moved into historically white enclaves. Dr. Marcus Thompson, a cardiovascular surgeon, had been stopped 4 times in 2 years, always within blocks of his home. Attorney Janelle Cooper had been handcuffed on her own driveway while her children watched from the window. Professor Raymond Lawrence had been pulled over, searched, and detained for 3 hours on a fabricated weapons charge that was dropped when his attorney arrived. Each victim told investigators the same thing. They didn't file complaints because they feared retaliation, because they didn't think anyone would believe them, because they had professional reputations to protect. Many described the same coded language Brooks used, the same aggressive posture, the same theatrical search of their vehicles while neighbors watched. They described the humiliation of being treated like criminals in their own neighborhoods, the rage of watching their children witness their powerlessness, the exhaustion of living in constant fear of a badge. The FBI had uncovered not just individual violations, but a sustained campaign of racial terrorism conducted under color of law. The trial began on a cold Monday in February, and the courtroom was packed with journalists, civil rights advocates, and victims who had waited years for this moment. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Hartwell opened with a promise. By the end of this trial, you will see evil in a uniform. You will see racism with a badge. And you will see it from 4 different camera angles in high definition, with audio so clear you'll hear every lie. She delivered on that promise. The prosecution showed the body camera footage of Richards' stop on 4 monitors simultaneously, Brooks' camera, 2 backup officers' cameras, and a dash cam. The jury watched in real time as Brooks ignored her federal credentials, lied about the legal basis for the stop, conducted an illegal search, and photographed classified court materials, while she explicitly warned him of the federal consequences. The footage was damning not just for what it showed, but for what Brooks' own voice revealed: the casual contempt, the confident illegality of a man who believed he was untouchable. Then came the victims. 47 of them testified over 8 days. Dr. Thompson described being stopped while wearing his hospital scrubs, his medical license visible on his dashboard. Attorney Cooper's voice broke as she recounted how her 7-year-old daughter asked if Mommy was going to jail. Professor Lawrence brought his dashcam footage showing Brooks planting evidence, a knife that Lawrence's attorney later proved had Brooks' fingerprints, not Lawrence's. Dr. Martinez presented her statistical analysis with devastating clarity. She showed the jury heat maps of Brooks' stops, clustered with laser precision in neighborhoods that were transitioning from majority white to increasingly black. She displayed probability calculations that reduced the defense's random chance argument to mathematical absurdity. The data visualizations were so compelling that 3 jurors were later interviewed, saying they'd made their decision during her testimony alone. But the fatal blow came from Brooks' own digital footprint. Prosecutors revealed text messages that included phrases like "bagged another one in Cascade" and "keeping the riffraff out." They showed his group chat with other officers where they shared racist memes and coordinated their community policing efforts. The defense had no answer, no explanation, no way to spin messages that included the phrase, "We need to make them uncomfortable enough to leave." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Judge Patricia Russo presided over sentencing with the gravity befitting a historic case. She read her opinion from the bench for 43 minutes, and every word was crafted to ensure it would be quoted in law schools for generations. "Officer Brooks, you did not simply violate the law," she began, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "You weaponized your badge. You turned the Constitution into a tool of oppression. You transformed the streets of Atlanta into hunting grounds where black citizens were prey and you were the predator." She detailed each count: 18 federal civil rights violations under color of law statutes, 3 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of tampering with federal court materials, and 1 count of conspiracy. For each count, she explained not just the legal elements but the human cost. When you photographed those sealed grand jury materials, you didn't just commit a crime against the court system. You committed a crime against every citizen who depends on the integrity of federal investigations to hold corrupt officials accountable, officials like you. The sentence was 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Brooks, who had stood confidently throughout the trial, visibly sagged. He was 42 years old. He would be 57 when released, his career destroyed, his pension forfeited, his name permanently attached to one of the most egregious civil rights cases of the 21st century. The civil trial ran parallel to the criminal proceedings, and the jury's verdict was equally swift and devastating. After only 3 hours of deliberation, they awarded Judge Richards $12 million in compensatory damages and $15 million in punitive damages, $27 million total. The jury foreman later told reporters they'd wanted to send a message that would hit the city's budget hard enough to force real change. The verdict represented one of the largest civil rights judgments in Georgia history. 12 other Zone 3 officers were terminated in the investigation's aftermath. Captain Thornton retired under pressure, forfeiting a portion of his pension. The entire command structure of the zone was replaced, and the Atlanta Police Department faced the prospect of federal oversight that would reshape its operations for a decade. Judge Richards stood at the podium in the federal courthouse's ceremonial courtroom, surrounded by civil rights leaders, victim advocates, and attorneys who had fought police misconduct cases for decades. She had called this press conference to announce her decision about the $27 million settlement, and the room buzzed with speculation. When she spoke, her voice carried the same measured authority it had in her car on that Tuesday afternoon, but now was amplified by vindication and purpose. I am donating the entire settlement to establish the Mildred Richards Legal Defense Fund, she announced. The room erupted. This fund will provide free, high-quality legal representation to victims of police misconduct across the Southeast. It will employ full-time civil rights attorneys, forensic experts, data analysts, and investigators. It will have the resources to take cases to trial, to fight appeals, to pursue justice even when the odds seem impossible. But it was her victim impact statement, delivered earlier in both the criminal and civil proceedings, that became the defining moment of the case. News outlets played it on loop. Law professors assigned it as required reading. Civil rights organizations printed it on posters. "I am a federal judge," she had said, looking directly at Brooks across the courtroom. "I have degrees from prestigious institutions. I have the full authority of the federal government behind me. I have resources, knowledge, connections, and power. And the law could barely protect me. For 3 hours, I was as powerless as any citizen on any street corner, subject to the whims of a man with a badge and a belief that he was beyond accountability. If the law could barely protect me, what hope do ordinary citizens have?" The question resonated because everyone knew the answer. It resonated because it was true, and it resonated because Judge Richards had transformed her answer from rhetorical question into concrete action. The Department of Justice imposed a consent decree requiring federal oversight of Atlanta PD for 10 years. The decree mandated comprehensive bias training, early warning systems to flag officers with patterns of complaints, body camera requirements for all traffic stops, and a civilian oversight board with subpoena power and independent investigative authority. It required data collection on every stop, disaggregated by race, location, and outcome, with quarterly public reporting. The reforms became a model that other cities studied and implemented. When Judge Richards returned to the bench 6 months later, her first case involved a police misconduct lawsuit from a neighboring jurisdiction. The attorneys who appeared before her noticed something different in her demeanor. Not harder, but more focused, more personal, more determined. She had always been an exceptional jurist. Now she was a jurist who had experienced both sides of the system, who understood viscerally what was at stake in every case involving the abuse of power. The legacy of that Tuesday afternoon traffic stop would extend far beyond one officer's prison sentence or one historic settlement. It would reshape policing in Atlanta, provide resources for countless victims, and stand as proof that accountability was possible, difficult but possible, when the system worked as designed. And every time a victim walked into the offices of the Mildred Richards Legal Defense Fund, seeking help against impossible odds, they would know that the woman whose name was on the door understood exactly what they were facing. Because she had faced it 2-3 houses from her own home on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when a racist officer made the fatal mistake of stopping the wrong person. Judge Richards turned her trauma into transformation, and her legacy continues to protect victims today. If this story moved you, honor her courage by subscribing and sharing this video, because accountability only happens when we refuse to look away. What other cases of justice should we cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. And remember, the law can barely protect a federal judge. Imagine what ordinary citizens face every single day. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.